You are about to listen to the full interview with Dr. David Sands. Dr. Sands is a human companion animal practitioner. He gained his doctorate in ethology at the Faculty of Science at Liverpool University. In 2005, Dr. Sands received a phone call from a television director asking, "Could a dog commit suicide?" What followed was an investigation into the dog-leaping mysteries surrounding Overtoun Bridge. We spoke with him about what he learned while studying the bridge. We hope you enjoy.
I'm Dr. David Sands. I'm an animal behaviorist, psychologist, ethologist. So I'm involved in human behavior and animal behavior. I'm from England and have lived here most of my life. I've lived in the States and traveled extensively. Did a lot of my research work in the Amazon.
In the Amazon, what were you doing there?
Investigating the upper Rio Negro for some studies on mimicry in some fish species.
Oh, wow.
That's how I got into it all. But I've always been an animal lover right from being a child.
Yeah, and maybe talk about how you developed this interest in animal behavior and what led you onto this path initially.
Yeah, probably like most children, father has a dog, goes down the woods. In my case, he would climb up trees and come down with eggs of birds and tell me what particular bird it was, or he would tell me the names of trees, and he would highlight things about animals, badger sets, rabbits, different species of birds. So, but just generally, I was a nature person, just like being outdoors. And when I grew up in the 60s, our playstations were the local woods and forests, and you could explore and understand a bit more about the natural world.
And when did you first become aware of this mystery surrounding Overtoun Bridge?
Yeah, I got a phone call from a director-producer about 2004. I'd not personally heard of it, although I've been to Scotland on quite a few occasions. I'm particularly fond of the Highlands, and I have friends there. And he kind of rang me up, and his first pitch was, do you believe that dogs can commit suicide? And I sort of laughed initially and said that as a human psychologist, I can say that dogs can't sort of imagine a situation in advance and say, right, I'm fed up with life. This irrational thinking that you would get from people. I said it's impossible. I rambled on, and sort of said they can't premeditate, and they don't have the prevailing mental capacity to actually think about it. And he said, well, I'm working on a documentary, and there's this bridge in Overtoun in Dumbarton in Scotland, and as far as we know, there's been sort of, hundreds of dogs that have leapt off this bridge. And then he asked me what I thought could be the cause.
Yeah, so, obviously Overtoun is thought of as being this bizarre spot where dogs unusually will jump from a bridge, but is it common for dogs to jump off high places like this? Is it possible that this is happening in other places and we just have... Yeah, definitely. But when I was actually fully involved in the research, I spoke to quite a few veterinary colleagues, and I even knew about a local structure that dogs had gone off on. There's very close to me, there's some wonderful gardens on a moorland hill, and there are a lot of sort of follies, and a couple of vets had actually spoken to me about treating dogs that have been injured jumping off these structures. And if you know a little bit about the physiology of the dog's eye, it's all about the rods and cones. They don't see as distinctly as we do, because a lot of the senses are tuned. Their sense of smell, their hearing is far more sensitive, and so the eyesight itself is not as significant. And the dog evolved hunting in twilight, at dusk. So they're listening for movement and sounds and smells they're looking for, and so it was about that they can get onto a structure and not necessarily see the depth of field that we can, where if they jump off it,
there could be a drop on the other side. And that's quite significant with the Overtoun Bridge, because the topography is very unusual in that it cuts across a gorge. So you go from level ground, and then at the peak of the bridge, there's a 50-foot drop.
So do you think it's possible that the dogs are still thinking they've seen that it's level before they enter the bridge, and they still believe, or at least as far as they know, it's still level beneath them over the bridge?
No, I mean, a few things I did when I was researching the bridge is I sort of tried to go down to a lower level. I mean, they're very thick stone walls, and they've sort of got this very distinctive turrets on either side that you can step into, almost like castle, semicircles. And you could imagine that a dog wouldn't really have a concept of what's on the other side, but might be curious enough to know. I mean, even when I was talking to the original director of the first documentary, Matthew Burgess, who's a really cool guy, we talked about what could be happening, and I said, well, the most excitable dogs are the working breeds not worked, the livestock controlling or the tracking dogs, sight hounds. And he said, well, that's interesting because the statistics we're looking at in the 60 dogs, there's a lot of collies and collie crosses, that are used for livestock control. So I said that before I even knew about the breeds involved.
Yeah, I'm curious about the statistics of the bridge itself, because I've heard things ranging from 60 all the way up to 600. And everywhere you read, it's a different stat. And I'm wondering, how were they keeping track of this, and where are these numbers coming from, really?
Well, yeah, when we you gave me an idea of some of the questions, I actually looked at some of the documentation that I had. Now, I was given a figure of 50 or 60 in the beginning in 2004, but I saw a headline from the Sun newspaper, which is a popular, red top as we call it, and they say mystery of 600 dogs jump from haunted suicide bridge. But I'm not aware of an accessible, verified statistic, to mean that you could look at online and say this number of dogs.
Yeah, and so I guess the number 60 though, do you know where that one came from? Like, is there who's tracking this?
Well, I got a newspaper article from a Scottish newspaper, and whoever had done that original research had looked up various articles and notes and sort of counted since the 1960s that there'd been accounts of 50 or 60 dogs, but locals knew that it had happened a few times, and I actually spoke to 3 or 4 people. In the first film, I interviewed Donna, whose dog Ben had done the jump and died, and I also spoke to Kenneth, who was the owner of Hendrix, a 17-year-old dog that had jumped but survived. These were sort of accounts that, we had spoken to the people. There was a lady called Alice and her son Thomas, and they had a Springer Spaniel that leapt from the bridge. So they were accounts that I knew in this current, at that time,
Do you remember any of those first-hand accounts? Like, would you be able to maybe recount kind of what they were doing and what happened on the day of?
I think the case was initially they were coming out of an area that it's a very rural area, and they're coming through woodland onto the bridge structure, and the dogs. If you've ever seen dogs that are tracking scents and the like, they're weaving. A couple of ideas that I looked at is I'm very alive to the kind of cues that dogs can pick up from owners, and it's a common reaction for people on a high structure, to actually look over And I imagine that people would naturally look over and look down at the gorge because you can hear the water from the stream. And I think in most cases, they're walking along, the dogs have gone into the turret and suddenly jumped off.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was wondering if, is there any commonality behind the owner's behavior when these dogs jumped?
Yeah, I think you'd need a full collection of first-hand accounts to actually say. But in most cases, people are not expecting it. The dogs are off lead, and they're running ahead of them, and they get onto the bridge. And there are distinct stopping points on either side. But it was the main, depending which way you're coming from it. But it was one side of the bridge that leads down to the gorge where almost all the dogs that I knew of had gone over. So it was typical, the first turret, and that was the most significant drop.
From the stories that you've heard, is it more common for dogs to die after making the jump, or do they generally survive the fall?
Well, out of the 3 or 4 people that I spoke to, 3 died. Hendrik survived because he landed on a mossy section. And at different times of the year, the river would be higher and flooded, and I don't know whether that would affect the bank. But that, in the main, the dogs died from the fall.
I mean, in your career as an animal behaviorist, have you ever experienced, jumping off bridges aside, any behavior from a dog that could be considered self-harm? No, definitely not. I mean, that's a projection of a human state, a mental state where you've got irrational thinking, and obviously there are complex sort of areas of depression and bipolar and mental health conditions that put people into that position. Dogs, the primary instinct is to survive, and I mean, there's a million years of evolution in a dog's behavior. That is to survive, but that doesn't stop them from getting themselves into trouble. I've heard stories about dogs jumping and then immediately running back up the bridge and jumping off again. Do you think there's any truth to these claims?
No, I don't know. That's almost an urban myth. I've seen that mentioned, and there was a period of time when various videos were put up on the channels. Some of the 3 documentaries that I was involved in, where people would come on and say, "Oh, why are the dogs going round again and doing it again?" But I didn't know of a single account of that happening, so that could be a myth.
You visited the bridge to explore the source of this phenomenon. Can you talk about your initial impressions visiting and kind of what you initially thought could be the source when you visited?
I felt it was likely to be a sort of combination of factors rather than one single factor. As I said, there was a common thread of the type of dogs that were very lively and athletic and working breeds. There was situations where you've got almost an optical illusion because, as I explained, the topography goes from level ground to this bridge crossing a gorge, so it's such a radical change. There's a lot of dense undergrowth. There will be a lot of smells and sounds from that. I walked on the bridge, and I was sort of. There is a gothic feel to the bridge, and there's many images that show that. But it is a very, very solid structure, and the walls are a decent height, but jumpable by an athletic dog. And I was sort of very conscious of, on the ground level of the bridge, you can't see beyond the trees that are all around it. So there's not as if there's a clearing where from the bridge you would see a view or a horizon. So I felt that was quite significant, and the walls are very solid, very thick. I could imagine in different weather conditions that could be a factor. There's a lot of theories about the dogs are mesmerized by an optical illusion or attracted to the sound of water. One theory was that the Fastlane naval base on the Clyde was radiating some kind of waves that was affecting them. There's some very significant electricity pylons that are local, and they could have created some static. And you'll know about the popular one that the bridge is haunted, and there's a spectre of a deceased man, who was sectioned under the Mental Health Act. There is a story that hit under when he was sort of having a particularly psychotic episode that he tried to throw a child off the bridge. And that story has sort of added to the mythology, if you like, surrounding the bridge.
Is that story true, that he threw his baby off the bridge, or is that just an urban myth? Do you know?
No, I think there was an incident, but the baby didn't go off the bridge. I think he was probably stopped. Yeah, very. I mean, the house itself, the Overtoun house, was used in a maternity sense for a period as well. I don't know whether that's post-war. So there was always this aspect of there could be babies and children around. I read, I'm sure I read a story somewhere where there were a couple of guys who, as youngsters, liked to play tricks on each other, or young men, and they created a spectre for the bridge. That could be something that's stood in the sort of local folklore.
I think you mentioned earlier that maybe your view on what could be causing this evolved over time. Is that true? And what did it evolve to now?
There was always this idea for me that there was no one single reason why the dogs had jumped off this particular structure. I always felt there would be contributing factors of the types of breeds, the weather, the number of animals around the bridge. And a wildlife expert was brought in who said he located footprints of animals. And I'm well aware that the scent of some animals, foxes leave a very strong musk, for example, and certainly if there are mink or even otter around, they would leave a very strong scent. And so I was kind of thinking the combination of the dogs can't see on the other side, owners tend to look over the bridge, which makes whatever's on the other side attractive to the dog. It might act as a cue. I felt the structure itself, the topography, weather conditions, the fact that a lot of the dogs were, long-nosed, very keen on scents. I think when we did the trials, which were meant to be fun, these weren't empirical tests, clinical with controls, but the researchers got together a series of scents, which I recommended, and we set up, I'm sure you've seen the video, where we brought a number of dogs together. They were randomly collected, these dogs. The last one was blind, which was created a slight moment of comedy, but they were attracted to the scent, and that's no surprise. In that would be the strongest smell anyway. But this idea of the mink, and there were local mink farms. Minks had been released by animal liberation people. Some people say no, they've never been seen, and yet I spoke to a local angler, who said that he had definitely seen them there's pools above the bridge, higher up on the hill, and he'd seen them fishing. So whether they were otter or mink, they're very difficult at a distance to distinguish. In fact, I'm just recalling right now, when we did the original filming in 2005, I'm pretty sure that I saw a low creature go across one of the border rails fences, in the further field. And I didn't imagine it because I'm used to looking for animals. and that could have easily been a mink or an otter.
Yeah, that was actually going to be my next question about the mink, because I know in the documentary, I think mink is put as the most likely cause. And then after looking into that, I saw there was a lot of maybe not a lot, but I think I saw an interview with a local hunter who was in very strong terms saying it's not possible. There's no mink in the area. But you're saying that there actually is like a mink maybe actually released into the area as a possibility.
Yeah, I think that's on the record. But, again, sometimes people put one and one together and get two. That's never been verified, on a film or documented specifically. I remember the wildlife expert who was with us in the team, because there were sound experts. There was, myself as an animal psychologist and others who were around, who were all doing various tests actually on the bridge. And these things are difficult because one person says yes, another person says no. I don't think that should detract from the fact that the dogs could be attracted to scent. Because if you've ever owned a dog that's tracking scent, and I have, once their head's down, they're away. I live in a very rural area, and my terrier can go missing as soon as she starts to pick up a scent. She's zigzagging, going through the trees, and it doesn't matter where she's going, she's just following the scent. So if I thought, these questions were placed to me at the beginning once I'd given my side of what I thought was going on, which was more a generalized idea that I was always targeting misadventure, but the whole idea of the mink became the one focus. But I'd said repeatedly that I felt that owner cues, the fact that owners would stop on the bridge and look, might be a signal for the dogs to sort of react in a certain way, go off on their own or do something. So that part's modified. Some of the new information that I got was somebody showed me a picture where one of the arches on the bridge had actually been altered. And that person felt that would create almost like a wind tunnel by lowering one of the arches, depending on and I wasn't aware of that, when we did the original documentary.
Are the dogs jumping generally from the same type? Are they going for these arches, or is it all over the bridge at different locations? No,
it's just these turrets. That's the place where the dogs they don't jump on the main wall. They jump, and on the turrets themselves have sort of slots, if you like, almost like a castle.
I thought the counter argument for the mink is kind of funny, because it's almost like the mink, it doesn't matter so much, right? These dogs would probably pick up the scent of any animal. It's just a matter of mink being the strongest scent, but they'll still go after the smell of a fox or whatever. So it seems like kind of a funny thing for people to get stuck on.
Yeah, I think that there was this, one of the reasons was there was this sort of animal connection of animal activists wanting to release the mink that were being farmed. So you've got a sort of a central theme of animals being involved. So I think that story came to the fore. And I'm sure you know yourself, once these things are online, they become fixed as though they're in stone. Whereas, I've always said right from the beginning, one, that dogs definitely don't do suicide, and two, it's more likely to be a misadventure. The dogs are in the middle of something, and it's accidental that this happens.
From your visits to Dumbarton, have you gotten a sense from the locals whether most people see this as just like a silly urban legend, or do you think people actually take it pretty seriously there?
I think some people do. In the last time I went up there, I managed to spend a bit more time just talking to general dog owners. And, there was a couple of ladies who were going across with 3 golden retrievers. They weren't bothered at all. But they were aware of the stories, and I think a lot of the locals are aware of the stories. So I think the people who encounter the bridge, who are maybe tourists or visitors, who were just there, for a period of time, they might get onto the bridge and not know anything about the previous history, but the locals know about it, and they either put their dogs on the lead as they're crossing, or they don't think their dogs are ever going to jump and just walk through.
I think I read that they actually, or someone was trying to put up a warning sign. Was that there last time you went?
I'm trying to recall, actually. There was a sign put up, but I don't know whether that was following the first documentary and whether it stayed there. I've seen pictures of the sign, so there was a sign, but I'm trying to think. The last time I went up was the last documentary, the one, I think, I can't remember if it's the William Shatner one, or on Weird or What, or, yeah, it's always good talking to Captain Kirk,
yeah, that's awesome.
But there was definitely a sign put there, but how long it stayed there as a permanent sign, to be honest, I don't know.
You talk about the Overtoun Bridge kind of becoming a fixture of your media life. I think the main documentary I saw was probably the original one that you did. I'm interested, like, how many media appearances have there been, and how much interest has there been generated since that point? Well,
it depends where it's being screened around the world. Sometimes the documentary comes up in other countries. And obviously, every subsequent documentary, whether it's for the Wild Files or the Weird or What, or some local media students did a film. In fact, I went up to the local structure here near where I live with them and talked about the fact that dogs had jumped off other structures, and it wasn't just this bridge. But I think as there's a peak in either people's interest or there's a big interest on the science-fi, the horror, the drama, so as soon as they go, I think I remember it once being in the top 20 haunted places in the world, and all of a sudden the little segment of the original documentary on my own channel sort of got lots of hits. And then, I'd get loads of weird comments, and I'm sure you know that there are people who are keyboard warriors who have an opinion and get involved. It always makes me smile. But I mean, there was a period where every week a researcher was calling me, and they could be from Japan or from North America or in Europe. In fact, the last article I did as an interview was for a German magazine.
That's really interesting. I wonder, I mean, before that initial documentary was put out, do you think there was as much interest in this topic, or do you think that kind of spawned all this modern interest and discussion around it?
I think the original article in the Scottish newspaper, I think that's probably where it started, and then it was picked up by other more national newspapers, and that probably got the original documentary maker involved. And certainly once it was made into a program, that kind of increased the exposure. And it is quite an interesting place to go and see. But this story is the one. And there's in the Far East, there's quite a big interest in the mythical, isn't there? So there's always a lot of interest from sort of Japan.
Yeah, I mean, maybe you could talk just kind of like what your reaction is to that belief that there could be something supernatural in origin behind these dogs jumping.
Well, I try to come from a scientific approach, but people, if they believe in it enough, it becomes real. If you know what I mean, there is a psychology in it where you can almost, absorb it yourself. I think it becomes a more exciting story when the supernatural ideas, become involved. And, I've been involved in documentaries where mediums have gone onto the bridge and said they can hear stagecoaches and dogs. And all I can think of is the Hound of the Baskervilles, in Sherlock Holmes. But it adds to the drama and the theatre of it, and it's one of the great things about being human, isn't it? That we have these stories running in our heads, and we're inspired by other people's stories. So I think as a theme, as an interest, it is quite exciting. But for me, I'm always thinking about the dog's perspective, which is sort of everything's about instinct, innate behaviour over learned behaviour, and you know, all their senses are tuned to whatever's going on, and we can't see a tenth of it, you know, because the picture they're forming is in scent and sounds and the like. So it makes us, for me, it makes it interesting as an animal story, and the documentary makers who made it were some of the best. I think, apart from work that I did with the BBC on what to do in a dog attack, and they approached it from a very scientific level, I think it was the most absorbing of the documentaries that I've been involved in, because usually it's about, you know, pets going crazy or whatever, and I try and avoid all that now. I mean, you know, it's entertainment, but I'm interested in the behaviour and you know what we expect from our dogs, and that in itself is a story, isn't it? Because the role of dogs has changed over time. You know, you've gone from almost all dogs being working dogs and having a task to now dogs being able to sense pre-seizure states and cancer, and you know, can detect TNT and so many different things as working dogs and utility dogs and helping dogs and animal-assisted therapy. You know, the role of the dog has changed, and then they're also accessory, aren't they? So if you're a celebrity, you've got one in a handbag, or if you're a local drugs baron, you've got these Hounds of the Baskervilles by your side.
Could you kind of describe just kind of what the area looks like around the bridge and what the bridge itself looks like?
Yeah, if you could sort of zoom in almost to it, it's almost hidden from afar. You drive into it or you walk into it, and it suddenly appears like the set of a film. And you've got this sort of Gothic-looking house at one end. You've got this sort of very thick sandstone walled bridge going across. It's not that great a bridge, you know. It's not San Francisco Bridge. It's sort of like a stone structure that runs, what could we say, 100, 200 yards or whatever. It's surrounded by woodland and flora and fauna, sometimes very overgrown. And as you come into it, it's sort of, spooky. It's like something you'd expect from a horror film, if you like. And then as you sort of leave the bridge and go on to the other side, you're into almost parkland. Now, if you actually go and stand in the turrets, then they're on either side of the bridge. You can look across, and you're either looking down at a gorge with a stream running through, which can be sort of fast and flowing if the rains have been strong, or it can be very low. On the other side, you can sort of look towards almost the Scottish scenery of woodland. So it's sort of set in the middle. It looks almost like in the middle of nowhere, but there is a town not that far away. But it's set in a very rural location.
I feel pretty confident that if it was just a boring steel bridge, we wouldn't be hearing these sort of stories coming out from it.
It's true. Yeah, and you know what's interesting as well? It's different in daylight than it is at night time. And I've gone onto the bridge at night time during some filming, and it takes on another character, you know, very much a sort of almost gothic horror film set. So it's kind of almost like dropped into it, like, you know, like a folly. It's not sort of part of a general architecture of the area. It's sort of there. I think that's perfect to say. It's like a set from some horror film.
You mentioned something about people saying, I hadn't heard the theory before about static electricity from electric pylons. What is that something that even affects dogs? Like, could that actually have a physical effect on dogs?
Well, that's hard to say because there's two fields of thought about it that high static can have an effect on people. Can there are some people who think that it can give them headaches. It's part of an electrification. They're quite significant, the pylons going in I presume from power station across into the main town city beyond it. Could dogs pick it up? I mean, you can hear buzzing. If you've ever walked in a field where there are these huge electricity pylons, you can hear them, can't you? So I would imagine a dog could hear that. But when we did sound checks, there was a sound engineer who came onto the bridge. There was nothing, great picked up on that. I mean, and again, the idea of these nuclear submarines, at the base at Fast Lane, which is on the Clyde, that they could be producing something, I think was all part of, almost a James Bond story.
And what did they think the nuclear submarines were? Just like a noise, a sound, or that?
Yeah, possibly from the nuclear aspect of the submarine, the machinery. But again, that there was nothing to quantify. But it all creates these. If you went through the list of what people think, what are the prominent theories? I think you wanted to know, and the sort of go down in order of. If you're thinking about the drama, the main one is that the bridge is haunted, and that things have happened on that, all the way down to something simple like extreme weather conditions. But this is where I think there could be a recipe for what's going on in that. There could be the sound of water, which would attract the breeds that are used to going into water for game. A lot of the Springer Spaniels and dogs like that, Newfoundlands, Labs, Retrievers are all water-based dogs. Could they be attracted to the sound of water? Yeah, it's possible. But a lot of the breeds that I looked at were collies or collie mixes, which is more a livestock controlling dog. The ones we've mentioned, the Fast Lane, the naval base producing something, the electricity pylons. The last option that I sort of thought about, having been given the information, was that the bridge had been structurally altered, and I could see from the pictures before and after that they had lowered one of the arches, and on the bridge there's a main arch and then two side arches, and one of the arches, the side where the dogs jump from, interestingly enough, had been lowered, and the theory was then that in certain wind conditions that would create a howl or a sound, but I don't know of a recording of that ever happening. But that was new information for me, and I think that was someone who pointed that out to me on Twitter last year or the year before. I've had a drink since then.
You mentioned that they generally jump from the archways, but is it always, I think you just said, is it always the same side of the bridge even too?
Yeah, I think so. If I remember rightly from the research. I was looking for my original folder of all my information, but if you understand that I've got 40 years worth of files and books and references, and I have a huge library of things to do with animals and human psychology, and I thought, how can I locate this? Because this is what happens. In 2 years' time, someone else will maybe ask me to revisit it. And I don't mind. It is an interesting, out of all the subjects that I looked at, this one brought in so many different things. It brought in the person's perspective, the dog's perspective, the wildlife perspective, where it's situated in Scotland. I mean, that's another thing, I remember talking to another psychologist who said Dumbarton had the highest rate of sort of suicides and mental illness which is not something to laugh about. But I suddenly thought, here we are, we're talking about dogs committing suicide, which is impossible. But because of the lack of employment and a general rundown of the area, there was this situation where there were a lot of people who were wandering around depressed.
So I grew up with a couple of pretty meek Chihuahuas who were not hunting dogs at all. So I don't quite understand the drive that a dog could have. I mean, if a dog was hunting an animal or got the scent, could they put themselves in a situation like running off a cliff or something like that would be led by their instinct?
I get what you're getting at. Not in the lemming style, of being led as a group, but certainly if a scent was powerful enough, the drive that they've got. I mean, some dogs, in terms of generations, are very close to actual working dogs that are used for hunting or dogs that are used for livestock controlling or whatever. They're not just companion animals. You could say the Chihuahua has been domesticated for a long time, but some of these dogs have actually come directly from working stock that belong to farmers or, people who go shooting. So now their drive, their trait that they've been selected for in the last few centuries is accentuated. So if they picked up something, whether it's movement, if it's a sight hound, or whether it's scent, if it's a scent hound, that drive is incredibly powerful for a dog. And they almost become blinkered, when they're on a trail. And some dogs have this greater drive than others, and it's very much breed. We've been selecting for traits in dogs for centuries, and whether it's to seek out game, flush out game, control or guard, protect, all these traits, like the terrier group, I think the oldest DNAs in the dogs are the mastiffs, which are the giants, and the terriers, which is the smaller group. And there are stories of terriers being taken to Malta by the Phoenicians, thousands of years ago for vermin control. And you ask anyone with a terrier, for example, and they'll say, show them a rat, and it's dead. So I don't know what the drive is for a Chihuahua. I don't know I'm trying to think what they were used for, because most of the Chihuahuas that I see are sort of lap dogs and are more like people than dogs.
Let us know what you think is happening at Overtoun Bridge on Twitter and Instagram at @strange_phenom and on Facebook at Strange Phenomenon, all one word. Strange Phenomenon is hosted by Ray Tarara. It's written and produced by RJ Blake and Ray Tarara. Theme music by Tara Monk. Additional music provided by Sergei Cheremizanov.